Julia Harper clutched her worn-out purse tightly as she stood in the checkout line of the modest grocery store. Her 4 young sons huddled close to her, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and hunger. The cashier, a young woman with a kind smile, began to scan the items Julia had carefully chosen: milk, bread, eggs, and a few canned goods. As the total flashed on the screen, Julia's heart sank. She didn't have enough money. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the cashier said gently. "You're a bit short." Julia's face flushed with embarrassment. She began to put items back, starting with the canned goods. Suddenly, an elderly man with a kind face and silver hair stepped forward from the line behind her. He wore a simple worn coat and carried an air of quiet dignity. "Allow me," he said, placing a few bills on the counter. "It's on me." Julia looked up, startled. I can't accept that," she stammered. "Nonsense," the man replied with a gentle smile. "Consider it a blessing." He handed her a small, well-worn Bible. "This might offer you some hope," he said before turning to leave. Julia stood there, stunned, as the cashier finished ringing up her groceries. As she gathered her bags and her sons, she couldn't help but feel a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Julia's apartment was small and cluttered, a testament to the chaos of raising 4 boys on her own. She and her sons entered quietly, trying not to wake Marcus. The boys quickly scattered, knowing the routine. Julia began putting away the groceries, her mind still on the kind stranger and the Bible he had given her. Just as she was finishing, Marcus stumbled into the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, and the stench of alcohol and stale sweat clung to him. "What's all this?" he demanded, his voice slurred. "Groceries," Julia replied softly, hoping to avoid a confrontation. "Where'd you get the money?" he snapped, suspicion in his eyes. Julia hesitated. "A man at the store helped us out." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "You're out there begging now? Making me look like a fool?" Before Julia could respond, Marcus's hand lashed out, knocking the grocery bag off the counter. Cans and cartons spilled across the floor. The boys, hearing the commotion, huddled together in fear. "You think you can make me look bad?" Marcus yelled, advancing on Julia. Julia stood her ground, a new resolve hardening within her. "I'm just trying to take care of our family." Marcus's eyes blazed, but something in Julia's stance gave him pause. He shoved her roughly aside and stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. Julia sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She felt a small, comforting hand on her shoulder. It was her oldest son, David. "It's okay, Mom," he whispered. "We'll be okay." Julia hugged him tightly, drawing strength from his words. She glanced at the Bible on the counter, feeling its silent promise. The next Sunday, Julia found herself standing outside the local church, her boys at her side. The church was a quaint building with a white steeple and stained glass windows. Nervously, she took a deep breath and walked inside. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with the soft hum of conversations. Julia chose a pew near the back, trying to stay inconspicuous. As the service began, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The hymns, the prayers, and the sermon all seemed to speak directly to her heart. After the service, a woman approached her. She had curly auburn hair and warm, hazel eyes. "Hi, I'm Pastor Sarah," she said with a welcoming smile. "I noticed you're new here. Can I help you with anything?" Julia hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Yuya. I'm just looking for some peace." Pastor Sarah's smile widened. "You've come to the right place. Why don't you stay for coffee and meet some of the other women? We have a support group that meets after the service. You might find it helpful." Julia agreed, feeling a small spark of hope. The church's community room was filled with comfortable chairs and a coffee station. The women chatted amicably, creating an atmosphere of warmth and support. Julia sat down, feeling a bit out of place but welcomed nonetheless. Pastor Sarah introduced her to the group, and the women shared their own stories. Julia listened, realizing she was not alone in her struggles. When it was her turn, she hesitated but then found herself opening up about Marcus and the difficulties she faced. The women listened with compassion and understanding. One of them, a woman named Lisa, reached out and squeezed Julia's hand. "We've all been there," she said. "You're not alone. We're here to support you." For the first time in a long while, Julia felt a sense of relief and connection. She left the meeting with a renewed sense of hope and determination. Back at her apartment, Julia began to make small changes. She started reading the Bible Henry had given her, finding comfort in its messages of hope and strength. She applied for a part-time job at the church and was hired to help with administrative tasks and community events. Marcus, oblivious to these changes, remained a constant threat. But Julia felt stronger, bolstered by her newfound faith and the support of her church community. One evening, as she read from the Bible, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer facing it alone. She had found a source of strength and a community that cared. Feeling grateful for the support she had received, Julia decided to visit Henry to thank him personally. She found his address from a church directory and made her way to his house on the outskirts of town. Henry's house was cozy and rustic, surrounded by a small, well-tended garden. Julia knocked on the door, feeling a mix of gratitude and curiosity. Henry opened the door, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Julia, come in," he said warmly. Julia stepped inside, taking in the vintage furniture and personal mementos that filled the house. She thanked Henry for his kindness at the grocery store and shared how his simple act had changed her life. Henry listened quietly, then shared a bit about his past. He revealed that he had known Julia's mother and had cared for her deeply. Julia felt a strange sense of familiarity and comfort in Henry's presence, as if pieces of her past were coming together. Back at her apartment, the tension with Marcus continued to grow. His suspicions and paranoia increased as he sensed Julia's growing independence. He demanded to know where she had been and accused her of seeing someone else. Julia, fortified by her newfound strength, stood her ground. "I'm just trying to take care of our family," she said firmly. Marcus's rage flared, but something in Julia's stance gave him pause. He stormed out of the apartment, leaving Julia and the boys in a tense silence. Julia knew that the situation was escalating and that she needed to take decisive action to protect her family. The following week, Pastor Sarah offered Julia a part-time job at the church. Recognizing her need for financial stability and a safe environment, Julia gratefully accepted. Working at the church provided Julia with a sense of purpose and community. She found joy in helping others and felt her confidence growing with each passing day. As she settled into her new role, Julia knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. But with the support of her church, her new friends, and her faith, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a renewed sense of hope and determination, Julia prepared to take the next steps in her journey, knowing that she was not alone. The events of the past weeks had set the stage for a new chapter in her life, one filled with promise and possibility. Julia stood outside the church office, clutching the key Pastor Sarah had given her. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The office was small but well organized, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a bulletin board covered with church activities and announcements. Julia smiled, feeling a sense of belonging. As she settled into her new role, Julia found satisfaction in the routine tasks of organizing files, answering phones, and helping with community events. She enjoyed the camaraderie with Pastor Sarah and the other church staff, who treated her with kindness and respect. Each day, Julia felt her confidence growing. She was learning new skills and discovering a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The supportive environment of the church made her feel safe and valued. Back at her apartment, Julia's progress was not lost on Marcus. He became increasingly paranoid and erratic, his involvement in drug trafficking making him more dangerous. He started staying out late and bringing unsavory characters around the apartment, filling the atmosphere with tension and fear. One evening, Marcus stumbled in, visibly agitated. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his eyes darting suspiciously. "You've been acting different." Julia, who had been reading the Bible to her sons, stood up calmly. "I've been working at the church," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm doing this for us." Marcus's anger flared. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just leave me behind?" Julia's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "I'm trying to make a better life for our boys," she said firmly. Marcus's eyes blazed with fury, but he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Julia knew she needed help. The next day, she visited a legal aid office, a stark and formal place that offered a glimmer of hope through its services. She sat nervously in the waiting area, clutching a folder with evidence of Marcus's abuse. A kind-faced lawyer named Mr. Thompson invited her into his office. "How can I help you today, Julia?" he asked, his voice gentle and reassuring. Julia took a deep breath and explained her situation, showing him the photos and documents she had gathered. Mr. Thompson listened attentively, nodding occasionally. "You've done the right thing by coming here," he said. "We can help you file for a restraining order and explore other protective measures." Julia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with relief. Back at her apartment, Julia meticulously gathered more evidence. She took photos of the bruises on her arms and recorded incidents when Marcus was not around. Each piece of evidence was a step towards securing their safety. Julia's sons watched her with wide eyes, sensing the gravity of what she was doing. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" David, her oldest, asked. Julia hugged him tightly. "Yes, David. We're going to be okay. I promise." As she worked late into the night, organizing the evidence, Julia felt a mix of fear and determination. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she was ready to fight for her family's future. Feeling the need for guidance, Julia visited Henry again. His house, with its cozy and rustic charm, felt like a sanctuary. Henry welcomed her warmly, and they sat in his living room, surrounded by vintage furniture and personal mementos. "I'm glad you came, Julia," Henry said, offering her a cup of tea. "There's something I need to share with you." Julia listened intently as Henry revealed more about his past. He spoke of his deep, platonic love for her mother and the regrets he carried. Julia felt a strange sense of connection, as if pieces of her past were finally coming together. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," Henry said, his voice filled with emotion. "I cared for her deeply, and I see so much of her strength in you." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Henry. Knowing this means a lot to me." Marcus's involvement in drug trafficking took a dangerous turn. A deal went wrong, and he found himself fleeing from the police. Desperate and cornered, he returned to Julia's apartment, his paranoia and aggression reaching new heights. "Julia, you've got to help me," Marcus pleaded, his eyes wild with fear. "The cops are after me." Julia stood firm. "No, Marcus. I can't help you. You need to turn yourself in." Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You think you can just abandon me? After everything?" Julia's heart raced as Marcus advanced on her, his fury palpable. "You'll regret this," he snarled, raising his hand to strike. Before he could, the front door burst open. Henry, having sensed the urgency of the situation, had followed Julia to her apartment. He stepped between Marcus and Julia, his presence a shield of protection. "Enough, Marcus," Henry said firmly. "This ends now." Marcus froze, shock and rage warring on his face. "What are you doing here, old man?" "I'm here to protect Julia and her sons," Henry replied, his voice steady. "You need to turn yourself in." Marcus's rage boiled over, and he lunged at Henry. But Henry, despite his age, stood his ground. He managed to restrain Marcus long enough for Julia to call the police. The police arrived within minutes, storming into the chaotic apartment. They quickly subdued Marcus, who was still struggling against Henry. As they cuffed him, Marcus's eyes locked onto Julia's, a mixture of fury and desperation in his gaze. "You're making a mistake, Julia," he shouted as the police led him away. Julia stood trembling, tears streaming down her face. Henry put a comforting arm around her. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "You're safe now." Julia nodded, her heart heavy but relieved. The nightmare with Marcus was finally over, but the road ahead was still uncertain. She looked at Henry, grateful for his support and guidance. Julia stood by the window, watching as the police car pulled away, taking Marcus to jail. Her sons clung to her, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. The apartment, though still cluttered and small, felt strangely quiet without Marcus's constant presence. Henry stood beside her, his expression a blend of sadness and resolve. "It's going to be all right, Julia," he said softly. "This is the first step towards a better life for you and your boys." Julia nodded, though her heart was heavy. She knew that turning Marcus in was the right thing to do, but it still hurt. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Thank you, Henry. I don't know what I would have done without you." "We're in this together," Henry replied, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. The next day, Julia and her sons returned to the church. Pastor Sarah greeted them warmly, her compassionate eyes reflecting understanding and support. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "It's been tough," Julia admitted, "but we're managing. I just want to make sure my boys are okay." Pastor Sarah nodded. "We have a counseling program here at the church. I think it would be good for all of you to attend. It's important to address the trauma and start healing." Julia agreed, and soon she and her sons were attending regular counseling sessions. The sessions were difficult at first, but gradually they began to open up about their experiences. The church community rallied around them, offering support and kindness. Julia found solace in her faith, drawing strength from the Bible and the church services. Her sons, too, began to show signs of healing, their laughter slowly returning. A few weeks later, Julia found herself standing outside the courthouse, her heart pounding with anxiety. She clutched a folder of evidence, ready to testify against Marcus. Henry stood beside her, his presence a comforting anchor. "You're doing the right thing, Julia," Henry said. "Stay strong." Inside the courtroom, Julia faced Marcus for the first time since his arrest. His eyes were cold and defiant, but Julia stood firm, recounting the abuse and presenting the evidence she had gathered. Her voice trembled at times, but she spoke with conviction. The judge listened attentively, and after considering the evidence, sentenced Marcus to prison. Julia felt a wave of relief and closure wash over her. As she left the courtroom, Henry was there to greet her with a proud smile. "You were amazing in there," he said. Julia smiled through her tears. "I just want to move forward now." Back at her apartment, Julia felt a newfound sense of empowerment. She focused on creating a stable and loving environment for her sons. She continued to work at the church, finding joy in helping others and contributing to the community. One evening, as she read a bedtime story to her youngest son, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mom, are we going to be okay now?" Julia smiled and kissed his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine." The words felt true, resonating with a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She was no longer the frightened, helpless woman she had been. She was a survivor, and she was determined to build a better future for her family. With Marcus out of their lives, Julia focused on rebuilding her relationships with her sons and friends. She reached out to old friends she had lost touch with, reconnecting and apologizing for her absence. One afternoon, she met with Lisa, a woman from the church support group, at a local cafe. They chatted over coffee, sharing stories and offering mutual support. It felt good to have a friend who understood her struggles and was there to support her. Julia also made a point to spend quality time with her sons. They went on picnics, played games, and had movie nights. Slowly, the bonds that had been strained by Marcus's presence began to mend. One evening, Julia visited Henry at his cozy, rustic house. They sat in the living room, sipping tea and talking about the past and the future. Henry shared more stories about her mother, painting a picture of a strong, loving woman. "I see so much of her in you," Henry said, his eyes filled with pride. "You've come so far, Julia. I'm honored to be a part of your journey." Julia felt a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Henry. I couldn't have done this without you." Henry smiled. "We're family now. We support each other." Julia left Henry's house feeling uplifted and inspired. She knew she had a long way to go, but with Henry and her church community by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The following Sunday, Julia and her sons stood in the church, surrounded by their supportive community. They were about to be baptized, a symbol of their fresh start and renewed faith. Pastor Sarah led the ceremony, her words filled with warmth and encouragement. "Today, we celebrate new beginnings and the power of faith, love, and community. Julia, David, Ethan, Noah, and Liam, may your journey be blessed with hope and strength." As they were baptized, Julia felt a profound sense of peace and renewal. She looked at her sons, their faces radiant with joy, and felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had taken together. With the support of her church, her new friends, and Henry, Julia was ready to face the future with strength and determination. The events of the past months had tested her, but they had also revealed her resilience and the power of community and faith. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew she was not alone. Together, they would build a brighter future. Julia awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. She felt a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. Today was the start of a new chapter in her life. After making breakfast for her sons, she walked them to school, enjoying the crisp morning air. David, Ethan, Noah, and Liam chatted excitedly about their day ahead, their faces reflecting a newfound happiness. Julia felt a surge of pride and relief seeing her boys so animated and full of life. As she returned home, Julia made a list of tasks for the day. Her job at the church gave her a sense of purpose, and she was determined to continue building a stable and nurturing environment for her family. She also planned to meet with Pastor Sarah to discuss new initiatives for the church community. Later that day, Julia arrived at the church and was greeted warmly by the staff and congregation members. The church had become a second home to her, a place where she felt valued and supported. Pastor Sarah approached her with a smile. "Julia, I've been thinking about starting a new outreach program for single parents. I believe your experience and insight could be invaluable. Would you be interested in helping me lead it?" Julia's eyes lit up. "I'd love to. It's important to give back and support others who are going through what I've been through." The two women spent the afternoon brainstorming ideas and planning the program. Julia felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing she was making a difference in her community. That evening, as Julia was preparing dinner, the mail arrived. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a letter with Marcus's handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it, unsure of what to expect. The letter was filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. Marcus wrote about his time in prison, reflecting on his past actions and expressing a desire to change. He asked for Julia's forgiveness, acknowledging the pain he had caused her and their children. Julia sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. She felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sadness, and an unexpected sense of compassion. She knew she couldn't forget the past, but she also knew that holding on to anger would only hinder her progress. The next day, Julia visited Pastor Sarah at the church. She brought the letter, seeking advice and clarity. Pastor Sarah listened attentively, her expression thoughtful. "Forgiveness is a powerful and challenging act," Pastor Sarah said gently. "It doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened, but it can free you from the burden of anger and pain." Julia nodded, tears in her eyes. "I want to move forward, but it's so hard." Pastor Sarah took her hand. "Take your time, Julia. Forgiveness is a journey, and it's okay to feel conflicted. You're already showing incredible strength by considering it." Julia left the meeting feeling lighter, her heart a little less burdened. She decided that, while she might not respond to Marcus's letter, she could forgive him in her heart and continue to focus on her own healing and growth. That evening, Julia visited Henry at his cozy rustic house. They sat in the living room, the warmth of the fire creating a comforting atmosphere. Julia shared the contents of Marcus's letter and her decision to forgive him. Henry listened, his eyes filled with understanding. "You're a remarkable woman, Julia. Forgiveness is not easy, but it's a testament to your strength and resilience." Julia smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "I couldn't have come this far without you and the church." Henry nodded. "We all need support and guidance. Your mother would be so proud of you, Julia. You've built a beautiful life for yourself and your boys." They spent the evening talking about the future, sharing hopes and dreams. Julia left Henry's house feeling inspired and ready to embrace whatever came next. The following weekend, Julia and her sons spent the day at the park. The boys ran around, playing and laughing, while Julia watched from a picnic blanket, a book in her lap. She felt a deep sense of contentment and joy watching her children thrive. As they enjoyed their picnic lunch, Julia asked her sons about their dreams and aspirations. David wanted to be a teacher, Ethan dreamed of being a firefighter, Noah aspired to be a scientist, and Liam wished to be an artist. Julia listened, her heart swelling with pride. "We can achieve anything if we work hard and support each other," she said, her voice filled with conviction. The boys nodded enthusiastically, their faces bright with hope. As the months passed, Julia and her family continued to grow and thrive. The church community celebrated their achievements, acknowledging the incredible journey they had undertaken. Julia's involvement in the new outreach program brought her fulfillment and a sense of accomplishment. One Sunday, the church held a special service to honor Julia and her sons. Pastor Sarah spoke about their resilience and the power of faith and community. Julia felt overwhelmed with gratitude as she accepted the recognition, surrounded by her supportive friends and family. After the service, the congregation gathered for a potluck lunch. Julia's boys ran around, playing with their friends, while Julia chatted with her new friends. She felt a deep sense of belonging and happiness. As the year drew to a close, Julia reflected on the incredible journey she and her family had undertaken. They had faced immense challenges, but through faith, love, and support, they had emerged stronger and more united. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Julia looked at her sons, their faces glowing with happiness. "We've been through a lot, but we've come out stronger. I'm so proud of each of you." David smiled. "We're proud of you too, Mom." Julia felt tears welling up. "We've built a new life together, and I know we can face anything that comes our way." The boys nodded, their eyes shining with determination. Julia knew that the future would hold its challenges, but she was ready to face them with strength and faith. They had come full circle, and their journey was just beginning.